With us now, two Democratic strategists in South Carolina, Antwuan, who worked on Hillary Clinton's 2008 and 2016 campaigns. In Washington, Kristen, Hawn, the former chief political advisor for the Blue Dog Coalition in Congress. Kristen, on that point, Politico reports, quote, the Warren campaign's been quietly frustrated that the same level of scrutiny hasn't been applied to her rivals, including Biden, Budaj, and Sanders, who have not released equally detailed proposals on how they'd pay for their own health care plans. Do they have a point here? Has some of this scrutiny been unfair?
I don't think so. I mean, and this is not surprising to me. You look at an issue like healthcare, people win and lose elections. They win and lose primaries. They win and lose general elections on the issue of healthcare. It's deeply personal to people. So, while in the beginning Medicare for All might have sounded good because people like Medicare and you take that name and people associate certain things with it, the sooner that people started realizing that that meant an almost assured tax increase on the middle class, and they could no longer keep the health care, the employer-based health care that they had, it's no surprise that it caused her numbers to plummet.
Antwuan, Warren's also struggling nationally this week. She's dropping in 2 new polls. Is this normal for a frontrunner, or should her campaign be concerned right now?
So several things. I think this speaks to what I learned growing up in the AME church, to whom much is given, much is required of. And when you're the front runner, you just have to expect that people are going to define you for the policy positions you may advocate for or positions you may take. That's number one. Number two, it also speaks to what this business is all about, ebbs and flows. And I think Elizabeth Warren is experiencing this. And then the third thing, it shows a disconnect, I think, between the temperature on the ground and maybe the temperature online and within the Democratic bubble. The sugar high can sometimes wear off. That's why I've said on this network from the very beginning, this primary is a marathon, not a sprint. Direction is more important than speed. And in the words of Mike Tyson, peaking at the right time is so important.
It sure is. Kristen, Joe Biden went through a similar cycle recently, losing some ground to Warren before rebounding. Do you expect that Warren will also bounce back? And is there something she needs to do to make that happen?
I mean, look, she still has a really strong ground game in Iowa, and so I wouldn't. I mean, and it's still early. You look in past presidential primaries, and the front runner at this point in time is hardly going to be the candidate ultimately.
Yeah.
So I think you gotta like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and I'm not sure that there's a time that's better to peak or not. Certainly on the caucus day, that would be a great time to peak.
Yeah, that would be optimal.
Can I?
Of course, Antwuan, go for it.
Can I say one thing to that? Look, I know flirting with Iowa, and that's all good, and it may be for the moment, but I will go back to Old Faithful. The most important state in this presidential nominating process will be South Carolina. Look, you will not have a better reflection, I think, of the temperature and the mood of our party until you get to South Carolina. So actually, any candidate can do well before you get to South Carolina and stumble, and then that could be really the benediction to their candidacy. So I would just tell you, I would invest in the most diverse state early on in this process, where we normally have our big say-so and who the Democratic nominee will be, and that's South Carolina.
Well, let's talk about South Carolina. Let's talk about the black vote. Antwuan, Pete Buttigieg rising in new national polls, but among black voters, he is at just 4%, trailing Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Kamala Harris. We know he has been at 0% with black voters in South Carolina. Can he close the gap, and how does he do that?
Well, let me say 2 things about that. Number one, you cannot be the Democratic nominee without broad, deep, wide, and strong support in communities that look like mine among the most loyal voter bloc, African-American voters. And there are some campaigns and there are some strategists and pundits, et cetera, who think that somehow or another you can rewrite the playbook. And when it comes to the coalition it takes to win our party's nomination, I would just tell them to check history. And I would also remind them that African-American voters realize their net worth more so than any other presidential cycle, and I think that our community is going to come out in full force in making a decision about who our nominee will be. And if you stumble in the primary, that tells me there's a good chance it will be very difficult to raise the enthusiasm in a general election in which we know we have to maximize African American turnout to have a chance of being successful.
Kristen, NBC News was the first to report that Budaj is going on the air in South Carolina next Tuesday with his first TV ads in the state, some $2 million worth. Smart strategy for him there?
I mean, I think he has to play there. If he's not where Obama was then. I mean, I think this. I know that he's been trying to draw this comparison in fundraising emails and in public pitches as he's talking to voters between him and Barack Obama in 2008. And I think it's in a lot of ways a false comparison, and he should be careful doing that. But I mean, certainly he has to spend money in South Carolina if he's going to make up lost time there.
Look, he's claimed it's a bit of a... Antwuan, jump in. Sure.
But spending money in the state is one thing, but spending money on the right message in the right places is another.
Right.
Look, my leader, Whip Clyburn, often says the key to a successful campaign in this environment is talking about how you make the American experiment accessible and affordable. Unless you do that, and unless you spend money in communities that will ultimately have a say-so in who our nominee will be, I think you're just wasting time, honestly, and wasting resources.
Kristen, quickly, let me ask you this. Part of the Budaj campaign's argument is that he just doesn't have enough recognition in South Carolina. Will ads at least help in that regard, or is that not enough?
I mean, I think I totally agree. I mean, you've got to have the boots on the ground. You got to spend the time with the communities that matter, and you have to have the right message. But just as far as television buys, you have to be up on television. You know, and I think Whip Clyburn is exactly right, and he knows South Carolina obviously better than anybody out there. But you got to be on TV as well. So I'm hoping that there is as somebody who does. Like the mayor, and I like that he brings a different perspective, you know, than just like a far left perspective. You know, I don't think that he's done enough in South Carolina, but he's got to be up on television at least.
All right, guys, we got to go. Very happy Thanksgiving to you, Antwuan, Seawright, Kristen, Hawn. Thank you both.
Thank
you. Happy Thanksgiving.
PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, facing massive criticism over its rolling blackouts, which have left California